Welcome to this episode of History Rewind in Lukman Nation Live. I'm so excited. I hope y'all are excited. I am Jackie Lukman, and welcome, yes, to History Rewind in Lukman Nation Live. And I'm glad that you're here tonight. I'm so sorry that this didn't start at 8 because you all patrons voted to do the History Rewinds at 8 p.m., but I had a meeting. I just hopped off that meeting, so apologies for being late, but 8 p.m. on Wednesday nights are from now on History Rewind Live nights. So I'm very, very excited about this. And yes, I know there's a lot of crazy stuff going on in the world, and we're going to talk about plenty of that. We do that on Darker Than Blue and on the Dark Room on Fridays and a few things in between. But these shows are for talking about the history that got us to this point. So let's get into it. I'm trying a couple of new things, so be patient with me, bear with me, please, while I try to get this set up correctly. Ooh, I hope I can get it right. Make sure I got my screen ready there. Okay, so let's get going with our history rewind starting on February 17th, 1942, when Huey P. Newton was born in Monroe, Louisiana. There we go. Ta-da! You got slides, y'all. So let's see what the first slide shows. This is Huey P. Newton, surrounded by youth of East Oakland in August of 1970. And this picture is from the Zen Education Project, and the picture was taken by a person named Ducho. So let's talk a little bit about Huey P. Newton, who is the co-founder of the Black Panther Party and one of the disenchanted and revolutionary sons of the Great Migration. Bet you didn't know that about Huey P. Newton, and maybe we're going to talk about the Great Migration one day. We should. It's an amazingly important aspect of African liberation history. But Huey P. Newton was born February 17, 1942, to sharecroppers Walter and Armelia Newton in Monroe, Louisiana. His father was a Baptist minister who was almost lynched for talking back to a white overseer. The family fled to Oakland, California in the mid 1940s, when Huey was a toddler. There, Newton, the youngest of 7, met with difficulty in schools, ill-equipped to handle the influx of newcomers from the South. He got pulled to the streets and into juvenile crime. It was only after high school that he truly learned to read. And he would ultimately attend law school and earn a PhD at Merritt College in Oakland, which is where he read Malcolm X and met his classmate Bobby Seale, who he co-founded the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense with. In 1966, he and Seale founded that party built on the ideas of political action first posited by civil rights leader, guess who? Stokely Carmichael, otherwise known as Kwame Ture. On February 17th, 2014, the Zen Education Project premiered this page for Huey Newton with this picture. And all of these little kids you see around the picture. Now, at the time this photo was taken with this group of children in 1970, Newton had recently been released from jail after the National Free Huey campaign was successful. And someone who was in this picture wrote to Zen Education Project on Facebook about the picture. The comment was from Anissa Nadira Karim, and she wrote on the Zen Education Project's Facebook post saying, quote, "I am the girl in this photo. My little brother is sitting right below Huey. This is a day I will never forget." She said in an interview with Zen Education Project when they reached out to her. And she went on to say, "Thank you for posting the picture of Huey Newton and the children. I'm the girl in the picture. My little brother John, with his hand on his face, is sitting between Huey's legs. My two little cousins are in the photo too, Al and Ken Jones. This was a wonderful day for us. He, Newton, played with us all the time. The photo is at the house where we had breakfast, lunch, and also arts and crafts activities. It's on 99th and International in Oakland. I had a piece of paper in my hand because I had been typing. I was 11 years old and volunteering as a typist for the Black Panther Party because in school I got in trouble cutting class. I needed to learn to type fast, so the Panthers helped me. I learned to type listening to the music of Santana and African musicians. I also learned how to develop film and pictures in the darkroom at the Panther headquarters on 85th Avenue in Oakland. We also had a school on 62nd where entertainers like Lenny Williams and speakers like Angela Davis would come and see us. I've met Bobby Seale, Erica Huggins, Eldridge Cleaver, and Emory Douglas. By the time I was 14, I was a clerk typist for the Black Panther newspaper. Today, I work on computers, so I am still typing. And you can see this is Miss Anissa Nadira Karim today. This is her picture right here. You can see my mouse, my cursor there. And this is the original picture with Huey Newton. This is 11-year-old Nadira, Anissa rather, right here. Beautiful, beautiful story. And this is Anissa here in the long dress. And she is with her siblings, including her brother John, who's in the red shirt, who was also in the picture. So that is a lovely, lovely memory to have been shared by the Zen Education Project with the update of their original Black Panther Party or Huey P. Newton entry. Let's go on to February 17, 1947, when Willie Earl, a 24-year-old, oops, nope, don't want to do that. There we go, that's what I want to do. On February 17, 1947, Willie Earl, a 24-year-old African-American man, was being held in the Pickens County Jail in South Carolina on charges of assaulting a white taxicab driver. A mob of white men, no, we don't have the story of what happened with the taxi cab driver, but you and I know that there probably was not an assault. And even if there was one, I bet you the taxi cab driver deserved it. But anyway, a mob of white men, mostly taxi cab drivers, seized Mr. Earl from the jail, took him to a deserted country road near Greenville, brutally beat him with guns and knives, and then shot him to death. When arrested, 26 of the 31 defendants gave full statements admitting participation in Mr. Earl's death. As the trial began, Judge J. Robert Martin warned that he would, quote, not allow racial issues to be injected in this case, end quote. Mob of white men murders a black man. No racial issues there. During the 10-day trial, the defendants chewed gum and chuckled each time the victim was mentioned. The defense did not present any witnesses or evidence to rebut the confessions and instead blamed, quote, Northern interference, end quote, for bringing the case to trial at all. At one point, the defense attorney likened Mr. Earl to a, quote, mad dog, end quote, that deserved killing, and the mostly white spectators laughed in support. Despite the undisputed confession, the all-white jury acquitted the defendants of all charges on May 21st, 1947, and the judge ordered them released. Some Greenville leaders cited the trial as progress in Southern race relations. Quote, this was the first time that South Carolina has brought mass murder charges against alleged lynchers. This jury acquitted them. If there should be another case, perhaps we may get a mistrial with a hung jury. Eventually, the South may return convictions. End quote. That was their their assessment of progress with this trial. In 1948, when Mr. Earl's mother attempted to collect under a state law ordering counties to pay $2,000 to the family of a lynching victim, her claim was denied on the grounds that, due to the acquittals, there was no proof that her son had been lynched. In 2010, a historical marker was erected near the site of Willie Earl's murder. That's all his family received. And here you can see a photo of Willie Earl from the Equal Justice Initiative. And this is a photo that was taken after these beasts were acquitted of lynching Willie Earl. Some of the 28 men acquitted of lynching Willie Earl celebrated in the courtroom after the verdicts. Let's move on to February 18, 1797, when Hercules escapes from enslavement from George Washington. So let me hop over here and look in our fantastic, okay, I see y'all are enjoying yourselves over there on Patreon. So let's get into this horrific story, shall we? In early 1797, possibly February 18th, there was a guess, they're not really sure, but February 18th seemed like a good enough day. Hercules, the head cook at George Washington's Mount Vernon plantation, not too far from where I am right now, escaped to freedom. Yay, Hercules. Hercules was married and had 3 children. Richmond, born in 1777, Evie, spelled E-V-E-Y, born in 1782, and Delia, born in 1785, all born into slavery on the Mount Vernon estate and slave labor camp, commonly referred to as a plantation. The Equal Justice Initiative replaced those words, and I think that's very pithy. Hercules became one of close to 50 people to escape from George Washington to secure freedom. He was preceded, Hercules was, in his escape by Ona Judge, who the Washingtons pursued. George Washington and his trashy wife pursued, but never were able to apprehend. Yay, Ona. This description is adapted from blackpast.com. In an interview on C-SPAN about the Black history of the White House, Clarence Lucene noted, quote, Hercules was Washington's cook, and Hercules also escaped. Now, Hercules' story is interesting because he was considered one of the most famous cooks in the country at the time. By the way, this is a little bit of an aside. You have to watch the Netflix series High on the Hog, where I believe in season 1, they talk about Hercules in depth. Yeah. Okay, so getting back to this narrative, he had been trained in Europe, I believe, and just was well known across the country as a great cook, and being extremely loyal to George Washington, so they thought. It's weird how white people thought that the enslaved were actually loyal to the people who forcibly enslaved them. That wasn't loyalty. That was lack of freedom, self-determination, and agency, like denied. Back to the narrative. Now, it's my sense that Hercules was probably in touch with the brother of Sally Hemings, who were 2 individuals who were enslaved by Thomas Jefferson. Her brother was a very talented cook as well, and they were both in Philadelphia at the same time. So Hercules was in touch with him. And I believe probably was influenced by the fact that not only did he buy his freedom, Sally Hemings's brother did, but Ona had escaped. And so, there was a way in which there was a buildup of freedom and reaching for freedom on the part of people who were enslaved to George Washington. Clarence Lusain wrote a book called The Black History of the White House. And the book Never Caught, the story of Ona Judge, is by historian Erica Armstrong Dunbar. Now, this is the very interesting and weird part of this narrative. In 2016, a scholastic children's book about Hercules that made light of his enslavement was recalled after a campaign by librarians, early childhood teachers, and many others, including from the Zen Education Project, co-coordinating group Teaching for Change. Excellent, excellent resources at Teaching for Change at the Zen Education Project. Under Pressure, Scholastic Recalls Racist Children's Book is the resource that I'm going to give you in the description of this show, so you can read up on that fight and what actually happened. But of course, I have some great pictures for you. Now, this is a picture, this right here, what you're looking at, is a picture of an actual historical marker that contains this quote from George Washington. Now, this, of course, is Hercules, because this is a part of a memorial, I believe, that is on Mount Vernon's property, on the estate of Mount Vernon, that talks about some of the enslaved. Now, I can tell you that this marker was not always here or always there at Mount Vernon. This has to be relatively new within the past, 15, maybe 20 years, because the last time I went to Mount Vernon, and I only went once and I only needed to go once, was before they had actually unearthed the slave quarters, and they did not have them on display yet, but they were in the process of being excavated, but they were not entirely on display yet. They were displaying what they had excavated thus far. So this memorial, I guess, was put up since then. I haven't been back to Mount Vernon since then, not going to go back to see it because this is ridiculous. But let's talk about what is it really about? Okay, let's look. This is the actual monument. This is the actual inscription on the plaque at Mount Vernon. And this website is the Historical Marker Database, which I guess has information about all the historical markers all throughout the country, I guess. So what the inscription is on this plaque that is supposed to be talking about Hercules and his escape, it's actually a quote from George Washington about freedom in relation to enslaved people. And George Washington actually said, "Freedom might be too great a temptation." The inscription on the plaque reads, "Hercules, Washington's enslaved chef, asked that his son Richmond be brought to Philadelphia with him. If Hercules wanted Richmond to witness free people of African descent in Philadelphia, his wish ended after a short period of time because Washington sent Richmond home after writing of his fear, quoted in the letter below, that his enslaved people here would seek freedom." And he thought this, folks, not because the enslaved didn't want to be enslaved, but because he thought that they actually were loyal to him, that they were happy slaves, and that they would be tempted. They would be lured away to freedom by these slick a well-dressed, smooth-talking, free Negroes in Philadelphia. That's what George Washington was saying he was afraid of when he said freedom might be too great a temptation. This is why he sent Hercules' son back to the plantation, because he didn't want Hercules' son to be tempted to want to be free. But he didn't think about Hercules because he thought Hercules was his Negro. He thought Hercules loved himself some Massa Washington. Hercules wanted to be free like every human being wants to be free. So, despite Washington's precautions in sending Hercules' son home, his concerns later became reality when Hercules himself successfully escaped. Washington said the idea of freedom might be too great a temptation for them to resist. At any rate, it might, if they conceived they had a right to it, make them insolent in a state of slavery. George Washington is literally saying, we are not going to be able to keep our slaves if our slaves think they have a right to be free. So we can never put them in a situation where they can entertain the idea that freedom is a right they could ever have. And there's your founding father. So much for founding anything. Anyway, let's move on, shall we? To February 18, 1965. When a group of civil rights activists gathered at the Zion United Methodist Church in Marion, Alabama for a night march in support of James Orange, the field secretary for the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, the SCLC, who had been recently arrested. As the demonstration started, protesters were met by Alabama state troopers who ordered the crowd to disperse and then attacked the protesters. This is what they have always done. They issue an order to disperse, and before they even finish speaking, they attack people before they can even move, if they were going to move. Jimmy Lee Jackson, his mother, Viola Jackson, and his 82-year-old grandfather, Cager Lee, were among those who fled the escalating violence. They were all at this rally now, all preparing for this night march to exercise their rights, to redress their government, right? We're supposed to have those rights. Surrounded by panicking demonstrators, the three sought shelter in Mac's Cafe. Police followed them into the cafe. Now, police told them to disperse, and they dispersed into Mac's Cafe. Police followed them into the cafe and physically assaulted them. When Jimmy Lee Jackson came to the aid of his elderly mother and grandfather, he was shot twice in the abdomen by Trooper James Fowler. Once again, we know who did it. Despite his wounds, Mr. Jackson managed to escape from the cafe before collapsing, but he died 8 days later at a local hospital. In an impassioned eulogy, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. honored Mr. Jackson, saying, quote, "I never will forget, as I stood by his bedside a few days ago, how radiantly he still responded, how he mentioned the freedom movement, and how he talked about the faith that he still had in his God." Like every self-respecting Negro, Jimmy Jackson wanted to be free, just like Hercules did, just like Hercules wanted for his son, just like Ona Judge did. We must be concerned not merely about who murdered him, but about the system, the way of life, the philosophy which produced the murderer. End quote. Dr. King was saying some radical stuff a long time before he is credited with it, that is for sure. Now, though he readily admitted to the shooting in the events aftermath. James Fowler did not face any criminal charges until 2007. And let me share. This is Jimmy Lee Jackson's mother, Viola Jackson, his cousin, Rachel Thomas, in the middle, and his grandfather, Cager Lee, 82 years old. They had just come from claiming Jimmy Lee Jackson's body at the hospital in Selma, Alabama. And this photo is from the Associated Press and the Equal Justice Initiative. And this is the funeral procession for Jimmy Lee Jackson. As you can see, it has to be thousands of people marched in that procession, honoring Jimmy Lee Jackson on his death. Mr. Jackson's death has been cited as one of the catalysts for the March 7, 1965 march from Selma to Montgomery, which became known as Bloody Sunday. Jimmy Lee Jackson's mother, Viola Jackson, cousin, sorry, just reading the caption again. See, this is why we have notes and an outline for a live show, because otherwise, just all over the place. How about a Florida teacher strike on February 19, 1968, when over 27,000 teachers and administrators from the Florida Education Association, or the FEA, handed in their resignation letters and walked out. It was the first statewide teacher strike in the United States. The Florida's teacher strike of 1968 occurred in response to Governor Claude Kirk's refusal to meet the FEA's demands on salary and school budget increases, and the overall failure of Florida legislators to fund public education. In a University of South Florida thesis study called For the Students, the 1968 Florida teacher strike, Jody Baxter Knoll explains that on February 19, 1968, more than 27,000 teachers did not show up to work, forcing numerous schools to close because of a lack of instructors. The teachers had finally reached their breaking point. They felt they could no longer adequately serve the students of Florida due to a lack of support from the legislature, Governor Kirk, and Florida taxpayers. The teachers, for their part, stood resolute in the face of a distrustful public and a reactionary governor. Perhaps buoyed by the rapid increase and direct action of social movements, such as the civil rights struggle of the 60s, the teachers saw 1968 as the time to engage in a radical fight against a system that had little concern for the education of Florida's children. While Governor Kirk's campaign rhetoric looked toward making Florida first in education, that sounds familiar, he did little to improve the schools. Kirk wished the impossible: to improve education without actually having to pay for it. Schools by 1967 seemed to be falling apart. Out-of-date textbooks pervaded almost every school, while some districts were forced to cut spending. And they did this by cutting the bus systems and placing a cap on kindergarten to save $1 here and there. The teachers saw Kirk's promises for what they were: hollow words used to appease the electorate. The teachers demanded reform, but got none. They fought for what they believed to be a just cause that would benefit not only themselves, but the state as a whole. While newspaper editorials lambasted the teachers and public opinion seemed to favor the state, the teachers did have a core group of supporters in the very people who had firsthand knowledge of the problems of an underfunded school system: the students themselves. Many students took to letter writing campaigns, and in some cases, school-wide walkouts to show their support, to look for change in a system broken for many years. And here we can see an image of the Florida teacher strike. As you can see, most of these teachers are Black, but not all of them are. But the involvement of the Black teachers is very important because the strike lasted until March 8, when the State Board of Education and FEA came to an agreement on increasing funds for public education. Many teachers went back to work after the strike ended, but thousands were also refused rehire due to their involvement in the strike. And in the 2017 article, Knoll describes how the strike was a continuation of Florida's Black civil rights movement and how African American leaders within Florida's civil rights movement viewed the teacher strike as a means to address the disparities between white and African American schools. See, the strike occurred after Florida teachers' unions merged as an integrated FEA in 1966. With the unions united, Black and white teachers found common ground in the struggle, which is what happens when white workers unite with Black workers every single time, which is why the government, the system, and the powers that be in this country do everything they can to make sure white and Black workers never unite. Let's move on to February 21st, 1965, when Malcolm X is assassinated. El-Hajj Malik el-Shabazz, otherwise known as Malcolm X, was assassinated. But the year before, in 1964, Malcolm stated that he wanted to bring charges against the United States at the United Nations for its treatment of African Americans. He believed that it was, quote, impossible for the United States to solve the race problem, end quote, and the only way to get the United States to change its racist ways was to bring international pressure. Malcolm said the American government is either unable or unwilling to protect the lives and property of your 22 million African American brothers and sisters. We stand defenseless at the mercy of American racists who murder us at will for no reason other than we are Black and of African descent, end quote. On January 5, 1965, Brother El-Hajj Malik el-Shabazz explained that we believe that our problem is not a violation of civil rights, but a violation of human rights. Not only are we denied the right to be a citizen in the United States, we are denied the right to be a human being. And here is a picture of Brother El-Hajj Malik el-Shabazz speaking in Selma, Alabama on February 4th in 1965, just weeks before he was assassinated. He was invited by the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee to come and speak to the youth at Brown Chapel AME Church. And I love this picture and this story in particular in Brother El-Hajj Malik el-Shabazz's life, because this is a perfect example of faith without works being dead. This is a man of faith talking to young people of faith in how to pursue justice for all people. Faith without works is dead. Malcolm understood that, and he set the example for us, all of us revolutionaries, and especially us revolutionary people of faith, regardless of what the faith is. Brother Al-Hajj Malik Al-Shabazz showed us what faith without works is dead looks like. Let's move on. To February 22nd, 1898, when Lavinia Baker and her 5 children and her husband were awakened in the early morning of February 22nd, 1898, by a white mob that descended on their home, the home of Frazier and Lavinia Baker in Lake City, South Carolina. The mob set fire to their home, which was also the town's post office, by the way, waking the family. And then the crowd began to shoot at the Bakers and their 6 young children as they were fleeing. Frazier was shot. Lavinia and 4 of their children were also shot. Frazier and his baby daughter, Julia, were shot to death. Lavinia and her 5 surviving children escaped. The lynching of Frazier Baker, who was the town's postmaster, was preceded by racist rumors, accusations, and less organized violent attacks by the white townspeople of Lake City. The harassment began after Baker was appointed by President William McKinley to serve as the city's first Black postmaster in 1897. Bigoted Lake City residents resented the appointment from Washington, D.C., and an article at blackpast.org describes the lead up to this night of terror. The mob at Lake City Post Office is what the narrative is called. From the outset, blackpast.org says Baker faced bitter opposition from Lake City whites. Residents filed several grievances against Baker, sharply criticizing his administrative abilities and accusing him of being incompetent, ill-mannered, and lazy. Among their complaints was that Baker had reduced mail deliveries from 3 times to once a day. Baker, however, had curtailed deliveries to daily drops due to repeated threats on his life. Federal postal inspectors investigated the claims and determined that the accusations against Baker were unsubstantiated. And what happened in Lake City was one incident in a wave of violent attacks on Black citizens by white men and women who were incensed by President McKinley's pro-Black actions in southern states. Candidate McKinley had spoken out against lynching to garner Black support while running for president. And after his inauguration in early 1897, McKinley set about appointing local Black Republicans to federal positions, like postmaster. In the aftermath of the lynching, the Black communities of South Carolina were outraged and took action through mass meetings. They petitioned the federal government to take action and bring charges against the suspected killers. The state did not press charges, surprise, surprise, but in April 1899, federal prosecutors charged 13 men with 24 criminal counts, including the murder of Frazier and Julia Baker. The judge declared a mistrial. The prosecutors did not move forward with the case, and no one was ever convicted of the crime. Lavinia and the 5 young Bakers, pictured here, left South Carolina for Boston that year. A historical marker was erected in 2013 at the site where the Baker home, which remember was also the city's post office, was burned to the ground by racist white mobs in 1898. And then in early 2019, the Lake City post office was renamed to honor Frazier Baker, thanks to congressional legislation first put forward by U.S. Representative James Clyburn. It's the only time I'm going to say anything nice about that man using his name. At the time of the announcement, the Charleston Post and Courier reported remarks by Frazier's great niece, Dr. Faustinia Baker. She said, "We would be remiss if we didn't recognize that we are coming close to 121 years in 2019 since the painful event against Frazier and the other members of the family. We, as a family, are glad that the recognition of this painful event finally happened. It's long overdue." End quote. But I have to ask you, patrons, I have to ask you, viewers, did the family get restitution of any kind for the horrific crime that impacted generations of this family? You know the answer to that question. So, thank you so much for watching this live episode of History Rewind in Lukman Nation. I think it went smashingly well. I hope you think it went well too. I hope you enjoyed it. I will upload all of the resource links to the description for you by tomorrow afternoon so you can read this history, click on all of the associated links, read all of the backstories, and learn on your own, at your own pace, go way deep down into the rabbit hole. I appreciate you so much. If you are watching on YouTube and you are not a patron of Lukman Nation, I can tell you that you will not be able to get all of the episodes of History Rewind unless you are a paid patron of Lukman Nation. And you can do that by joining at patreon.com// Lukman Nation, LUKMANNATION. Thank you so much for joining me this evening, patrons. Talk to you again soon. A luta continua. The struggle continues. But if we keep struggling and if we keep looking into our history to chart our path for taking the struggle forward, Victoria Acerta. Victory is certain. Peace, everybody.